what about Tina and the baby? You've got to get back in there. And that's, you know, that was the thought of, like, my wife being pregnant, you know. And that was it. That was the last conscious thought that I had. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. And what was happening was there'd be a pocket of room, and if you happened to move your hand into that pocket, it'd close again. So whatever position you were putting your body in was getting trapped there until the next wave. I had a watch on, the glass in my watch popped out. It just blew out. I don't know whether it was pressure on my arm or what. At one stage, my arm went to the side, and I desperately tried to pull it back because it would have been snapped. There's no doubt about it.
I was told to go off the pitch, you know, and then we were expecting to go back on. Kenny was doing his job in the dressing room, as was Roy Evans and Ronnie Moran, to keep you focused, you know, to go on 15 minutes later when everything was sorted out. For one reason or another, whether word got back, but in an instant there was room, something happened. I'd like to think it was because people realised and stopped, and then the people who were going in came back. But there was suddenly room.
So it was just all this pandemonium going on, and the fans then, and them angel fans who just took it on themselves. They reacted quicker than the authorities, you know, kicking the advertising boards and using them as stretchers. That was ingenious, but it was just instinctive. You know, your instinct tells you when another human being's in serious danger. But the police didn't react. It was all too late. Whatever they were being told or whatever mindset they were in that day, they weren't ready for anything like that.
I climbed onto one of the barriers, teetered onto the edge of the thing, jumped down onto the steps, and then got onto the pitch. And then it was just a matter of, I was breathing really heavy. There was people coming around with water, and I got some water, I think. And then I was lying on my back. I think I fell on my back and just looked at me. I can distinctly remember this incredible blue sky. It was mad. It was just, I completely switched off from what was going on, and everything zoned out, the sound, everything. I can just remember looking up at this blue sky, and then it all just went right back in again.
But the longer it went on, you know, 10 minutes went to 20 minutes, 20 minutes went to half an hour. And then we could hear people in the corridor, you know, crying and shouting, you know, there's people dead out there, and but we didn't know we just didn't know what was what. Till obviously it dawned on us something was really wrong, and then the match was cancelled. Kenny came in and said, you know, there's been fatalities.
I had a St John's ambulance guy come up to me and opened a tin that had a tube of Savlon in it and a bandage. And I just looked down, the kid was crying, and it was like, what are you going to do with that? You know, what good's that going to do? You know, it was just the absurdity of the day and the lack of provision for a day like that.
You don't expect to go to a football match and end up looking for your brother, you know. And I didn't actually find out he was alive, and all the hospitals and all the press in your face and all that, like, and that made me angry. And people saying, "We just keep a cool head," because that's exactly what they want. And found out, well, rang home, and he hadn't been in touch, and found out about 8:30 that he was alive, and it was like, don't forget, this happened at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, 3:15 in the afternoon. That's a hell of a long wait, you know, and obviously elation, but then I'm thinking, and you see other people going over to bodies and finding out it's one of theirs, and they're, honest to God, you couldn't imagine it.
What Liverpool fans did that day, and again, indicative of football fans in general, because football's a classless sport. You can stand next to a brain surgeon at a football match, and there was a surgeon there that day who got into the crowd and helped a hell of a lot of people. But one thing I'll always be eternally proud of is that it was Liverpool fans that were breaking up advertising hoardings to use as stretchers. They were taking the coats off and wrapping them like you do a towel, 3 or 4 to a man, and using them as stretchers. These are supposed to be people who aren't fit for work, people who can't think for themselves. They even tried to get the net down to use as a rope ladder to get people out of the. All that with the continuous interruption of the police, who were just pushing them all back. Just, you know, we took this guy round the corner and literally sort of, as gently as we could, put him down where there was a lot of others, and then ran back. I made about as many trips as I could. You don't realise how big a football pitch is till you run across one. The length of one. I did one with an advertising hoarding, and then grabbed the other end of somebody else's coat and took another one off. So by then it was dawning on me that this was a lot worse than anyone in the ground knew.
It was numb. Just numbness when we went upstairs afterwards and we were having coffee watching it unfold. You know, people, you know, we've seen it on the telly and it was just behind us on the pitch, and you felt like you should have been out there really helping people at times. But we weren't allowed to, and the journey back, it was just, you just didn't know what was happening, and you felt numb. That's the only way they could really express it.
I was walking on the steps of the of Leppings Lane, and within, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hours of that disaster, it was like being on the First World War battlefield. You know, the twisted metal and the discarded clothing and the shoes, and you know, and the whole place reverberating. And I remember some fan weeping on my shoulder. I was just a sort of body, and you know, he was saying I remember him saying to me, he was saying, 56 dead, Rogan, 56, and I was saying, no, it can't be that many, you know, it can't be that, you know, we just had no comprehension. Even those of us who'd watched it had no comprehension. It just, those numbers just ratcheted up, you know, inevitably as those hours rolled over.
We just went onto the cop and just went up to where we stood in the cop, and there was just all the school ties, like we're just hanging from the barrier with all messages on, you know, and there's a pair of his football boots with messages on, all from the school, you know. I thought, oh. And then when you turned around and looked at it, it was just some sight, you know what I mean? It really was. But when I say some sight, it was heartwarming, you know, to think these people are feeling it with you, you know. These people are behind us.
The steward was taking us round. He said to me, Kevin used to like the cop, didn't he? And I said, yeah. He said, well, come on, well, let's go and have a look in the cop, because I'd never been in it before in my life. You know, the old cop. And it was like, just covered in scarves. And we walked behind the goal. And then Sarah had a sweatshirt that Kevin had give her. She used to get all the old kit, and she was only 10 at the time, and she wanted to tie it around the barrier. And the funny thing is, we pulled a blue scarf and a red scarf apart to tie it, and there was Kev in his metallic writing scraped on the barrier, because it's the way he did his K's. And I looked at Stephen and I said, he stood here one day and he's, you know, scraped. So we laid all the flowers at the bottom of that.
If you'd have asked me to describe Liverpool Football Club in its pre-Hillsborough incarnation, I would have tried to describe to you something rather like a sort of cross between the old KGB secret police headquarters in Moscow and a nunnery. It was fierce and pure in some magnificent way. You know, you never got in there except on a match day. There was no sort of inflow of people who used the club into the club. There would be virtually no community scheme or community aspect to the club in those days. The club was overnight translated from this pure and severe and conservative institution into something which looked more like a Hindu temple, with private altars being built in the corners of the cop, with flowers covering the pitch, with the gate, every door open. You know, the club simply overwhelmed by, not just the local people, of course, were there in their many, many thousands, but people travelling from all over the world in some cases. The Shankly Gate with its first scarf, a blue one, tied that night to the gate. The city unified.
People will remember, for instance, the chain of hope, that stretched from Goodison Park to Anfield, and it was It was red, blue scarves, which stretched across the whole park, and the fans themselves organised that.